I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He is the author of the book Dreaming, no other than Mr. Anthony Matthew Basile.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you for having me back on. Pleasure to be here.
Yes, it's my pleasure to have you on my podcast. Where have you been?
Where have I been? I guess here on Earth.
Have you been to another planet just like your novel dreaming?
Some days I wish, but unfortunately, for better or for worse, I've been here on Earth making the best I can. So,
So let's talk about your book before we go on to our main agendas.
well, it can be found on the Barnes and Noble website. It's available both in e-format or paperback, and it's also available on Amazon, both on Kindle and paperback as well. So you can find it either one. It's not available in any brick or mortar stores that I'm aware of at this point, but I did, I'm going to try to go to some of the local bookstores and see if, they can, maybe stock it as well. But, it's difficult. But it is available on Barnes and Noble and Amazon now, if any of your listeners want to check it out.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Anthony Basil because his book is one of a kind that need to be read.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Anthony, we did not talk about this one. What are the struggles that you are facing right now in terms of distributing your book, your novel?
Well, I mean, I think it's one that a lot of indie authors would say. It's marketing, really. It's really getting the word out there. It's such a great thing these days that there are so many people who are letting their voices be heard, who are out there writing stories and telling stories, whether it's memoirs, nonfiction, fiction, erotica, whatever it is. They're letting their own personal taste and voice be heard, which is such a great thing. The kind of, I guess, downside or double-edged sword to that is, of course, that just means there's tons of books out there, and it's such a vast sea, a vast ocean of books to choose from that it is difficult, I think, for indie authors to, and maybe even, big time authors too. I don't know. I mean, I guess if you're Stephen King, you don't have to worry about it, but um, it's, I think, difficult for authors these days to, rise, their voice above all of that, and, really kind of find their niche market and their niche readers and their fan base, because you really have to kind of, you're it's like, trying to get your voice heard in Times Square, New York City. It's there's a lot in there that's competing for your voice as well. So it's just, for me right now, it's just, like I said, trying to find the fan base, trying to find the kind of niche market. I think, from the readers that are reading it, it's getting good feedback. It's just a matter of, how do you get other people to pick it up, especially as a first time author. This is my first book. How do you get somebody to not only notice you, but then take the chance to say, okay, well, this person never wrote a book before, but hey, I'm going to give them a shot. I'm going to, plunk down the, $5, or, if it's an ebook, or, the $13 if it's a paperback, and, try to give their book a shot. So that's, I think, the biggest thing I'm running into right now is just, people are very supportive, on Twitter and everything like that. Like I said, the people who are reading it are getting good feedback. I am getting people to buy the book, but not, at a large enough scope where it's really kind of, finding its niche market is difficult.
So, as your first debut novel, what did you learn from it?
I mean, I definitely, I definitely learned, I think, how to bring a story into fruition. This was, um, not only went through, beta readers, obviously went through the editing process. I did numerous passes on it. I couldn't even tell you how many times I read through the book. I wrote the book, and honestly, I mean, I think the final pass before I handed it into the publisher for the final time, I mean, I was kind of like, okay, like um, I read this book like 15 times now. I kind of get a little stale, even if so. Um, but it was a lesson I think for seeing something through like that and really kind of putting all my focus into it and really having just a lot of feedback and really diving in that deep into my work. I've had other works come to fruition as well, but this one was really kind of painstakingly going over and really polishing and repolishing and adding stuff and waking up in the middle of the night and suddenly having this new idea or to incorporate or this thought that, oh well, wait, in this world they wouldn't know what such and such is, so I have to make sure I don't have that term in the book anywhere. And so it was a little bit of a fever dream, for especially for the last couple months as I was trying to put the finishing touches on it. So I definitely learned that process and learned that I can do it and what that takes. And I think the other learning process is of course the marketing. And as I said, it's I mean, I can't say I feel like I figured it out, the writing process of how to fine tune a world from scratch. That I feel like good job. I'm sure there's room for improvement, hopefully in future novels that I write, but I mean, I feel like I kind of learned that and got the A+. I feel like I haven't passed the test yet, or passed the course here in figuring out how to market. So that's definitely and with really, I should add, I'm not doing it with any kind of budget. I mean, my publisher, of course, they have their budget and what they're doing. But as far as what I'm doing outside of the publisher for myself, which I'm sure indie authors again know, when you have an indie publisher, I mean, you have to market yourself as well. And I really don't have a budget for marketing, so to try to find ways to do that has been an uphill battle, to be honest. And that I have not felt like I've kind of learned the lesson yet. I feel like I'm still in the process of learning, but I'm still open to ideas. I'm still trying new things. I'm here doing this podcast, hopefully to reach people. I've submitted my hat in the ring, at other podcasts as well. Um, and I'm just trying to see what I can do. Like I said, I'm going to try maybe going to some local book stores in my area. Unfortunately, there's a lot of festivals in my area, but again, I don't have the budget, so it's a little bit difficult. But hopefully, I'm in the midst of making some career changes. So hopefully, maybe next year this time that will be a different story, and I can try again in some of these festivals and conventions and stuff like that.
Yes, and one of your reviews says 2 months ago, this was a very interesting and unique book. Beautifully written, immense, and immersive world building.
Yes,
Reviews, it's one of a kind. So please do support Mr. Matthew Basile because the book is something phenomenal. All
thank
right.
you.
So, Mr. Matthew, let's do talk about your favorite book.
Well, it's probably my favorite sci-fi. Well, I don't know. It's 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 one of my favorite sci-fi. I go back and forth between this one and another book as well, which maybe we'll talk about in the next episode. But this is definitely up there. Like I said, it's definitely either one or two spot, which is Dune. It's a classic. It's was published, I believe, in the 1960s by Frank Herbert, who has since passed on. But I actually just recently read it though, because I, my dad was a sci-fi um, nerd too, for lack of a better. He was a sci-fi nerd.
Yes.
So I had seen, I think, a commercial when I was a kid about Dune, or I don't know, maybe I heard him talking about it or something like that. But somehow or another, he told me the general premise of it and everything like that. And it sounded interesting. It sounded like something I would, but I think, I was like 13 or so. Not that I didn't read sci-fi classics back then. I mean, like, I think I read War of the Worlds when I was like 10 or 11. But, for some reason, I just never picked up Dune. And then, like, as I was a teenager, I saw commercials. The Sci-Fi Channel had a mini series on. Um, so, I saw commercials for it. I was like, wow, this looks really cool. But again, for some reason, I just never picked it up. And then there was, of course, the movie that came out in a couple of years. I guess 2001. I think it came out, or 2022, 2022. Actually, I'm sorry, it came out 2022, and or no, 2021. Okay, I was right the first time. I just looked it up. But so I looked at, I saw those commercials, and I was actually rewatching some tapes of a different of a series that I had taped when I was a teenager, and they had commercials for the Dune miniseries as well. So between those two things, I was like, wow, this looks really cool. But at the same time was when I was kind of sparking the ideas for dreaming. And I actually think some of those commercials that I was seeing for the Dune movie and the old Dune miniseries from the 1990s, I think kind of was helping gel some of these ideas that I had long been playing around with for the last couple of years, ever since really COVID, occurred and lockdown. I kind of went through this creative frenzy while, we were locked down. And some of those ideas kind of never really formulated how I wanted them to. And then all of a sudden they started gelling together. And I really think, Dune was helping be the kind of the glue that was bringing these elements together. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to hold off. I don't want to read it or watch the movie or anything like that until I'm finished the first draft, because I don't want to, you know, I don't want to rip it off or, like, retell it or anything like that. So I didn't read it till after I was done the first draft. And it was just, it blew me away, really. It was just such a phenomenal feat. And like I said, I really enjoyed it. And ironically, I mean, I'm glad I waited, because I think Dreaming is very different than Dune, but there are some similar themes, I think, in there. And ironically, and I didn't even realize this, I think, until I actually started going back, and one of the edit passes, I guess I was doing while I was reading Dune, and one of the minor characters in Dune is shares the same name as a minor character in Dreaming. And I have no idea. I don't know how that happened, because, like I said, I didn't read Dune. I never watched any of the movies or miniseries or anything like that. I just saw the commercials, and it's a very minor character. But and a lot of the names in Dreaming, either they had very specific meanings, or I was just kind of pulling them out of thin air, or I was like Googling like names from other cultures. And that name happened to be one I pulled out of thin air, and because it was, like I said, just a minor character. And it, like I said, it happened to be a minor character in the Dune book too. So that was kind of a cool little accident, I guess, coincidence.
Yes. So, what do you think? What is the difference of Dune to your book Dreaming?
Well, I think Dune is a lot heavier with the philosophical themes, which I'm just a sucker for, um, and which is probably why I like Dune. So Dune definitely goes in heavier with the themes. I think we both built immersive worlds. Dune's world kind of is much more of a slow burn. And by that, and the book itself is much more of a slow burn, meaning it really, you kind of, through the main character Paul, you kind of learn the world, and it's kind of little drop, here or there. He mentions something. He's talking about something with another character. They do something, and you slowly, as you read this book, slowly, very very slowly. I can't emphasize the slowness of it, but you slowly get to build this very elaborate world that Frank Herbert built. Whereas I think when I was reading Dreaming, I kind of, my story is much more fast paced. It's more akin to, um, I think, like this a series on like Netflix, or Hulu or something like that you would see, or a movie you would see in the cinema. It's much more action and much more we dive right into it, and we're just, there's all these different gears moving, and you're trying to keep, and all these parts are bouncing off the walls of this room that you're in, and you're trying to keep them straight. So because of that, I guess, I, started off with the first few chapters trying to kind of lay out the world much more, in front of you. So I kind of, started. There's one of the earlier, I think in the first chapter, it involves, this big summit of all these, governments in the solar system, and they're talking about, the different political alliances they have, and what's going on in the world. And I take you into this, just this person who's just coming out of this like school system that they have, basically, and is like just trying to get oriented in the real world. And so it's much more like I'm trying to show you, the reader, what this world is, rather than just kind of giving them a little drip, and okay, here, just little breadcrumbs. I'm definitely trying to give you the most of the meal up front, so that way you can kind of grasp, what's going on in the story. There's still other parts of the world, obviously, that are introduced later on in the story, but I'm trying to give you, the reader, a firm grasp kind of within the first chapter or two of what the overall themes and political and culture oral world this is.
So thus, Frank Herbert influenced you in your writing.
Um, in a roundabout way, as I said, like I said, Dreaming I didn't read until after I did, and that was I mean, that's, I know he read some other books, but I haven't read any of his other books. So that was the first book I read of his, and it was after I wrote the first draft of Dreaming. I definitely think he kind of, in a roundabout way, did influence it, just from what I knew about Dune before going in, and kind of the elaborate, like, I think the biggest thing I took from Dune was, which other sci-fi stories have taken this as well, was in my Dreaming novel, there's basically like, there's the big political powers, is like a kind of, there's different governments that govern each planet, but there's an overarching like, um, entity called the Way of the Light, which is like a kind of like, basically, it's their spiritual house, basically, in the solar system. So it's kind of similar to what like medieval Europe was like, where the Catholic Church, kind of had full authority over all the countries, like over all the kings, but the kings governed, their country, individually. So there was Spain and, England before they broke away from the church, and there was France, obviously, and stuff in Portugal. So that it was kind of that setup. And then there's also, though, these like three groups that are like heretical against that, and those, I think, that kind of political setup was very much inspired by Frank Herbert's Dune, because Frank Herbert's Dune has a lot to say about politics, and it not in a way of, liberal or conservative, but just about the political machinery, and what happens when you try to instill politics into, a world, and into over people and over a culture. And I think a lot of those things that he was trying to express in that book, I think I tried to carry over in a maybe a little bit of a lighter way. I didn't go as deep as he did and as heavy, but I did try to carry over and express in my book Dreaming.
So do you think your novel Dreaming will become timeless like Dune?
One can only hope, Mr. Daniel. One can only hope. I mean, that would be. I mean, I don't know about any other writer, but I mean, that's, I think, my live long dream is to, become immortalized in a work of art that I made. So I would love it to. I think it, I think it has a lot to say. I think Dune had a lot to say back in the 1960s, and I think Dreaming has a lot to say back now. And I think there's stuff that Dreaming still has to say to the, this day and age as well. So I really do feel like Dreaming can be both read as just a fun adventure, space opera, but I also think it can be a voice in the conversation that we have going on nowadays in our global culture.
Definitely. If you're gonna do a prequel or sequel of Dreaming, is it the same genre as Mr. Frank Herbert did on his novel?
Well, yeah, it's the same. Like it's a sci-fi one. Mine has more. Well, I don't know. Might have a touch more fantasy elements. Although Frank Herbert's Dune had a few fantasy elements as well in it. Because I think he again maybe as I said I didn't go as far into the political spectrum as he did. I think I went further into what he was doing with the fantasy elements and kind of the ethereal things that he was the concepts that he was dealing with. I went further in dreaming with. So yeah, I would. But as far as if I did a prequel or a sequel, it would stay with obviously within the same genre. I actually did start writing a prequel, but I tabled it. I put it on pause for right now because it just wasn't coming out the way I wanted it to, and I didn't want to tamper with what I achieved in dreaming. So maybe I'll revisit it later. But I decided to just take a break from that world and move on to another project.
So, Dune, what do you think the flaws of the novel?
The flaws in the novel, I would say, for me personally, and I know some think it's flawless, but for me personally, my flaws on Dune are one, I think it takes a long time to build up. So funny thing is, my flaws are actually the beginning and the ending, um, and I'll explain this. My flaws at the beginning are that I think it takes a long time to build up, and I understand why it needs to be that way to some degree because it's building a world and it's a slow burn kind of thing and it's trying to establish the characters and the setting and everything like that, and he's trying to say a lot. But I really kind of felt like when I was reading it, even though I love the book, I'm like hesitant to reread it again because I feel like I got to read like 200 100 or 200 pages before I really get to what the crux of the story is, and what's really going on there, just to kind of set up the political world that he's trying to set up. So that's, I feel like, could have been maybe done a little bit faster, with some of that narrative could have been just condensed a little bit more to get us into the world and some of the characters that are introduced and everything like that, and some of the events that go on. I kind of feel like, yeah, they're cool. Again, it was written back in the 1960s when books were a lot longer because you didn't have as much options with TV and movies. But I just kind of now I reading it, I guess I've kind of feel like, okay, let's just let's get what we need to get established. The dinner scene, for instance, establishes a lot. I feel like there you could have taken the. I feel like maybe you could have taken like what Paul experiences before he enters Dune, before he comes to Dune. Feel like you could have taken the dinner scene, and honestly, I feel like that could have been mostly what you needed. There's a lot of stuff with the Baron where I just feel like, okay, we get that the Baron is a horrible person. We don't need to keep going back and forth with the Baron, that he's a horrible person. He explains this plot so minutely and with such flourish. And I kind of feel like, and I'm not really ruining anything for readers who haven't read it because it's pretty much in the first few pages you discover there's a plot afoot here, an assassination plot, basically. And I feel like the plot's pretty straightforward in all honesty, and he just goes on and on, this Baron character explaining it and all the intricacies and why he's doing this, and all the depths of these people that are involved with him in it. And I just felt like that could have been way more condensed. And like I said, the Baron's a horrible person. We kind of get that off the bat. We get that he's the villain. It didn't need to be elaborated on. A lot spent on this time on this character that dies pretty early on. A couple of characters actually that die pretty early on. A lot of time spent on them, and I just kind of feel like, yeah, we could have fast tracked that.
Yes.
So that's my complaint with that one. And my other complaint is the ending. And it's not that the ending was bad. It's that the Dune doesn't have there is no ending in Dune. The ending, in my opinion, to Dune is Dune Messiah, which was the sequel, and I'm using air quotes right now. I know you can't see me, but I'm using air quotes. Dune Messiah was the sequel to Dune, and I've read them both, Dune and Dune Messiah. And I remember reading at the end of Dune, I was like, "Wow, this was really good," but I mean, it kind of just ended. Like, what happened to all the thing that he was talking about the what is it you call it? Not the crusade, the jihad. He spends a lot. The main character Paul spends a lot of time talking about this jihad that he sees forthcoming, and then it just kind of is like, nah, at the end, and I'm like, um, all right. Well, I mean, it was really good. I mean, I really enjoyed it and everything like that. Because I mean, once it gets up and running, it's really good, and it's really good all the way up until the final sentence is amazing. But it's like, well, but I don't feel like I kind of felt like there wasn't a resolution. And then I spoke to somebody else who I knew who was on, like, I think the fourth book, because there's, I think, five. Well, there's tons of books in the Dune world, but I think there's five that Frank Herbert, or six maybe, that Frank Herbert wrote before he died, and he was on like the fourth one or something like that. And I went to him. I was like, wow, Dune was really really good. I feel like it kind of didn't wrap up everything though. And he's like, yeah, he's like, read Dune Messiah, and he's like, it's kind of like an extended epilogue. And I read Dune Messiah. I was like, yep, that's the ending. That's what I needed to see. You just essentially you needed a whole nother book to finish it, which I understand considering what the elaborateness of the world that you built and the story that you were portraying. But yes, Dune Messiah is the ending. So for those like me who read Dune and are like, well, it was good, but I didn't really feel like it kind of had that catharsis moment. Read Dune Messiah. It is the ending, in my opinion. It was the ending that it was the perfect ending. It established the whole Dune as a perfect, narrative, at least a perfect arc for Paul as the main character. And so that would be my critique: is that he didn't end it in Dune. He ended it in Dune Messiah. But honestly, like I said, the I would say the last half to the 2/3 are just brilliant, brilliant. And like I said, all even the ending, it's brilliant. It's just like I said, it doesn't have that cathartic moment. Paul was worried about paying a price, and we needed to see the end of Paul's arc, and that was established in Dune Messiah, which Dune Messiah from it doesn't take that time to really establish the world because it's already established in Dune. So you get right into it with Dune Messiah, even though they throw a few new curveballs at you, stuff that's not anywhere in Dune are suddenly now front and center in Dune Messiah. But still, you're just right in the action, right in what's going on, and it's just. I guess Doom Messiah could be said it's kind of a slow build up as well, but I just found Doom Messiah to be, yes, okay, I get why all this is happening now because of what I read in Dune. So it was just to me, the perfect story, the two together.
So the Dune and the Dune Messiah, what is the big connection to each other?
Well, again, not, without trying to spoil anything for anybody out there who hasn't read Dune, basically you're following mostly in Dune, you're following Paul, who's, again, I'm not really spoiling anything for you, who's trying to basically rebuild his kingdom. And because it got kind of overtaken. And in Dune Messiah, he is the king, but he's basically dealing with the ramifications of the choices he had to make to avenge his family honor and to reestablish his family's kingdom, and he's dealing with those ramifications, and they're basically now who he had to become at the end of Dune basically is now weighing on him, and it's just kind of shows the result of his choices as they play out. So it's, to me, that's why it's the ending, because it shows the ramifications of his choices that he made in Dune, and he made those choices, and they have certain consequences at first, but there's long stemming ramifications, which he brings up in Dune. He talks about he hesitates doing these things because he's afraid of the long standing ramifications of them, and they come to fruition in Dune Messiah, and he has to pay. He has to face the brunt of them, and basically pay the piper as to what his decisions were.
Yes, very well said, Mr. Anthony. Dune was won for the best novel Nebula Award.
Mm-hmm.
Oh wow, that's be awesome. So before we go on, Mr. Matthew, I want to shout out to the people listening in United Republic of Tanzania. I'm number 2 on Apple chart. Thank you so much. Hong Kong, I'm number 34. Bulgaria at number 63. And Algeria at number 129. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast, because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world, just like Matthew Anthony Basile.
Yes, yes.
Definitely. So, what are the characteristic of Mr. Frank Herbert in writing that you like best?
What was his writing? What did I like best?
Yes.
I liked the fact that he was very straightforward with his writing. In other words, he described stuff, but he kept the narrative thrust moving forward with his writing. He didn't take pauses and go off on tangents. He didn't, start describing the castle elaborately for pages and pages and pages. So he kept the narrative thrust going with a very, very dense world. And like I said, I know it's a slow build up, as I said, but it's a slow buildup, but he's doing it at least through character interaction, through events and everything like that. And I did appreciate that. That does keep you going, because I think if he went off on tangents and did it some other way, I don't think I would have been able to make it through that first third. But because he keeps the narrative thrust going, because he keeps introducing you to characters, he keeps you involved with the characters. And I really liked, and I actually did end up adapting this to Dreaming, because he has a lot of sections where he'll go right into the thoughts, and he puts it in italics of the characters. So you'll see their internal thoughts as they're trying to decide how to handle a certain social situation, or try and decide a certain strategic maneuver. And I ended up actually, after reading that, I kind of went back and incorporated that. I had some instances in my own novel where I went to the internal thoughts of characters, but I actually, but I those ones I separated and did italics like he did, and I actually decided to include a few more in my novel, because he did inspire me in that way. So that was, I guess, another way he did inspire me as well. But I did really appreciate that. I love it when authors take you into the heads of the characters, even just briefly, and multiple characters. That way, you kind of get to be in their shoes for a little bit and kind of know where they're coming from, even if you don't necessarily agree with everything that they're doing in the story. And I really appreciated that. And like I said, I really appreciated that he kept the narrative thrust going. He didn't, kind of pause it to go off on a tangent, or go off in his own philosophical, musings, and he just kind of kept everything going, which I think was so important, because he was introducing so much to us, and it was such a dense world that, like I said, I probably would have lost it if he didn't. So I did appreciate that he at least kept introducing us to the world through the characters and through the action.
Yes, very well said. So, if you compare Dune to Star Wars as a movie, what are the big difference?
Well, and to put it out there, Dune actually is one of the inspirations for Star Wars, and that's on record that Dune inspired Star Wars, and you can see some of that inspiration, obviously, with the Force in Star Wars. It's not The Force isn't as evident in Dune, but there is. That's why I said there's certain fantastical or metaphysical elements in Dune that Frank Herbert does give to certain characters. And I think that was kind of a real interesting thing in Dune, because it's a little more subtle than the Jedi in Star Wars. and a lot of it is centers around a female kind of cult, a cult of all women, which I thought was really interesting and really progressive for the time, considering Dune was written in the 1960s, to put women front and center out there as such powerful figures. Because the Jedi, quote unquote, in Dune are, like I said, all women. And I thought that was kind of really interesting. But so I say that's kind of a similarity that carried over to Star Wars. Obviously, the planet of Tatooine, where Luke Skywalker grows up, is very similar to Dune. It's a desert planet. Dune's a desert planet. So those are definitely in there. You are kind of dealing with a quote unquote evil emperor. He's not as straightforward evil in Dune as he is in Star Wars, but those are some similarities. So I would say Star Wars kind of took some of the themes of Dune that were very subtly in there, in the political themes. Well, political themes aren't subtle, but he took the themes of Dune, and Star Wars kind of just kind of amped them out, made them a little more black and white, made them a little more kind of pop culture, and and it also kind of made it more kind of kid friendly and a little lighter, and did all that. So Star Wars kind of took Dune and made it kind of more child friendly, family friendly, a little lighter, and just more pop culture. Whereas Dune's a lot more philosophical. It's a lot weightier. It's definitely not kid friendly, and it's, although I mean, I guess teenagers, I guess, might be okay with it. I'm trying to think if there was any kind of graphic stuff in it, but it's definitely not geared towards kids. It's definitely geared towards adults. Whereas I feel like Star Wars is more geared towards families, and I think, like I said, Dune kind of was much more weightier and much more philosophical. Whereas Star Wars took that philosophy and made it a little more black and white. There's the dark side and then there's the light side, Whereas in Dune, it's a little more difficult to tell who's. It's a little grayer, as to who's doing what, for good reasons or bad. So
Yes, definitely. So why do you think that Star Wars is more famous than Dune?
I think Star Wars is more famous than Dune just because it is more poppy. It's more accessible in that way, because it's not as dense of a world. First off, in Star Wars, you don't have to you don't have to get to know all the political houses, and you don't have to know what spice is and why it's so valuable, and you don't have to get to know all the different political factions and what they're angling for, and what their end goals are. So it's a little easier to access and just kind of sit back. And I think Star Wars was a movie, and Dune was attempted to be adapted into a movie. It was only successfully made into a movie in 2021, and even then, so far, we only have the first half of the novel. So I think in that way, it was because movies are a little bit more up, even back in the 1960s, they were a little bit more out there, and mass marketed. So I think that helped it as well. And I think, there's just Star Wars not only took elements from Dune, but it took elements from a lot of other things as well. It took elements from samurai films. It took elements from a lot of the, like, Flash Gordon stuff, and other pop culture, sci-fi things that had gone on out there, that had already kind of established a fan base, like Dune. So I think it took obviously a lot of Buddhist philosophies and Eastern philosophies, which were coming up, were entering especially in the West, were entering the Western minds in the 60s and 70s. So I think because of that, it really kind of just tapped a nerve with the culture. And I think when you do those things, when you pull in from a lot of different sources like that and make it a little broader like that rather than niche, I think a lot of times it has a lot of broader appeal, and it really resonates with the collective consciousness, because okay, hey, I might not have read Dune, but hey, I'm a samurai. I love samurai films, and I love this, the samurai culture. So that's what's gonna draw me to Star Wars. Hey, I'm not really into samurais and laser weapons and Flash Gordon, but hey, I really love Dune, so I'm gonna get pulled into Star Wars. Hey, I'm not into all that philosophical stuff, but hey, I love spaceships and space pirates, and I love space battles and all that stuff that and I'm going to watch Star Wars because of that. So I think or I am really into the overarching theme of the kind of prodigal son, or the adventurer who's the small town farm boy who's pulled into a venture. That story really resonates with me, so I'm going to go look at the Anakin Skywalker, saga, and really get pulled into that whole thing of the father being redeemed and by his son who was a, distant farm boy and stuff like that. So I think a lot of that kind of pulled into there. Whereas that, Dune's kind of its own entity, whereas Star Wars is kind of a patchwork of a lot of different entities.
Yes, very well said. So, if you were be a Franklin Patrick Herbert, what you gonna do to make this novel more popular than the Star Wars? Because they all copy the things that make Star
Right.
Wars popular
Sure.
from the Dune. What you gonna do?
What am I going to do to make Dune more popular?
Yes.
Well, honestly, I mean, I already feel like I would feel like it's popular. I mean, if I wrote Dune, I would be satisfied. If Dreaming gets half as popular as Dune, I'll be on cloud nine. But I would I mean, for that, I would, in today's world. God, I don't know
Yes.
what you would do, in all honesty. I guess I would try to get on podcasts to talk about Dune. I would try to contact Kevin Smith to see if he would have me on his podcast. And I would try to see if I could get on some maybe political podcast or talk shows, and talk about some of the political themes that are in Dune, because I think they're very much relevant today. I would probably try to go to comic book conventions and sci-fi conventions and market Dune in that way. And I would try to get Netflix to make a Dune series, or Time Warner to make a Dune movie.
Yes.
So Time Warner did make a Dune movie. So what do I think? What's the factor that's going to make it a success in the movie industry?
Yes.
I don't know if it's going to be. I think it has to come down to the second movie. I think I understood why they broke it up, because they didn't want to shortchange it, especially for the fans. But I think if I was someone who hadn't read the books and came into, I haven't seen the movie, but from what I know, what they got to in the first movie, and quite frankly, if I was a newcomer who was just watching the movie and I saw the first movie, I'd be like, eh. Because it's just kind of like a lot of people talking about stuff, and some sucky thing goes down at the end, but I don't know if I would really feel invested in the characters at that point. And so I think it really has to hinge to marketing the second movie, and marketing. I mean, they tried to build on the romance, I think, in the first film between Paul and Chani. And so I think, I don't know if that sold enough. And I think, they really have to kind of come through in the second movie and show these themes, and what is really the price, and what's really facing Paul as he comes into this second film, and the price he
Yes.
has to pay to really, do what he feels like he needs to do.
Yes, definitely. And let's give background to Mr. Franklin Patrick Herbert was born October 8, 1920 and died February 11, 1986.
Mhm.
He was an American science fiction author, best known for the 1965 novel Dune and his its five sequels. Oh, there's a
Mhm.
lot of sequels.
Oh yeah, there's a lot. he kept on writing. He kept
Yeah.
on writing, and if I mean, it depends on how far you want to go with it. For those who are interested in the story here, I mean, because as I said, I felt like you needed to read both Dune and Dune Messiah to get the initial story. You kind of, if you go into the third one, then you kind of expand onto this whole other kind of arc that they go for the next two, that book and the next book, and then if you go on beyond that, it's a whole nother new kind of story arc and new kind of thing that's going down and challenge that they're facing. So it kind of I give credit to Frank Herbert. While still staying within that world, he reinvented himself twice in my opinion, or three times in my opinion. Um, while he was doing that, so it was quite a feat.
Yes, and these are the sequels: Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, God, God Emperor of Dune, Heretics of Dune, and Chapter House
Yes.
Dune. Wow, there's a lot.
And his
Uh,
son, his son kept writing. I don't know if he kept writing the sequels, but I know he kept writing spinoffs. So you can also, if you're really a fan of the Dune series and the Dune world, there's tons of like spin-offs that he did. I don't know if he kept doing what his father was doing in that story arc. I think he did, in all honesty, but I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to double check that. But I know there's a ton more that his son ended up writing beyond the five that Frank Herbert wrote.
Interesting. Can you do that also to your dreaming? I say dreaming alive, dreaming sequence, or dreaming
yeah,
hallelujah.
yeah. I guess maybe I will have to do that.
I encourage you to do that because
I'll,
as Mr. Herbert make the franchise alive, right?
yes,
To make Dune become timeless. I
yes.
cross my finger that your dreaming will be timeless soon, Mr.
Thank you.
Matthew.
I'm crossing my both fingers too. all my fingers. All my fingers are crossed.
Yes. And before we go on, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, on our third season. Please do check Food 101. So let's talk about your book, Dreaming.
hmm
Let's update us once again.
Yeah, so like I said, it's available on Barnes and Noble, and it is also available on Amazon under both on e-format and paperback. And you can search either Dreaming, the title might bring it up, or you might have to search my name, which is Matthew, Mathew, A as in Alpha, and then B Bravo, Asile. So it's just like the spice basil, but with an E on the end. So Matthew A. Basile, you could search my name, or you can search the title Dreaming. It is, like I said, on Amazon and on Barnes and Noble. And I just received a new review on Barnes and Noble, and I think since we last recorded, I have a review on Goodreads too, which is really something. So that was
Yes.
really exciting.
Yes. Can we talk about new reviews?
Certainly.
Okay, so can you tell me the first review, Mr. Matthew?
You want me
I
to
didn't.
read it out to you?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay, hold on. I didn't know that. Let me bring it up. The Barnes and Noble review. There's two on there. I think we covered the first one on our last, the last time I was on, which when we discussed where the crawdads sing. And then there was just another one that I found today, which states it was a 5-star review, and it says, such a great story. The world that Matthew A. Basile creates in this story is incredible. I love the story of Deleth and Harmonia. It is definitely a book that will keep you turning the pages and has such a great ending. Action
Ye-
packed, couldn't put it down.
yes, definitely phenomenal. So let's support Mr. Basil because dreaming is one of a kind and phenomenal.
Thank you. Yes, and I appreciate you, Mr. Daniel, for giving me that consistency. And yeah, I will definitely do it again. I will talk about my other favorite sci-fi novel, which is also from, I believe, the '60s, which is called Stranger in a Strange Land.
Why do you like 60s novel?
I don't know. I guess I'm old timey like that. I like some current stuff too. We'll do some current stuff, but I felt like both Dune and Stranger in a Strange Land and The Godfather, which were all three in the '60s. I guess I read a lot of what my dad read, and so I guess that was what I kind of grew up on and what really made an impression on me when I was growing up on how I saw the world. And I still feel like those books, really kind of really speak to me with how I view things and my values.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. You take care.
Moticon people, see you soon.